Welcome to the most important episode of the Together Show yet. I'm lucky to be joined by Arthur McFarlane, the grandson of W.E.B. DuBois, who was a founder of the NAACP. And the Together Show is all about us coming together around issues that matter, having fun too, enjoying, educating, learning. So I get to learn, you get to learn, we all get to learn.
Absolutely.
And today on the Together Show, we're going to be saying some things. Some may be controversial, some may be opinions that are shifting. Neither Arthur nor I are right or wrong. We're just giving our opinions and thoughts. Me, the grandson of a rabbi who escaped Nazi Germany and gave us a life here after being persecuted. And then me, myself, seeing the cultural shift the last 4 years with anti-Semitism, shooting of Jews in this country that I had never seen before. And also me being a white guy who, while I'm Jewish, and that is a group of people we have been persecuted for thousands of years, I'm not black, and I don't know what it's like to be a black man in this country. And so in that way, I still have what we call white privilege, in that a lot of these issues that are going on right now are not things that I or anyone of my color can say they totally understand, because if they do, they're lying. And so I want to start, Arthur, and then, because Arthur is an activist, he's been learning and doing this his whole life, carrying on the family legacy of what your grandfather did. And I've been trying to do a similar way. I look at it like I'm a small fraction of what Rabbi Alfred Wolf did. And I know you're carrying on your family's legacy. One thing your grandfather said about the country is that the cost of liberty is less than the price of repression. Mm-hmm. And one thing my grandfather said about Germany, so that was about this country and about the freedoms that we deserve. And he said that, my guess is, in the early 1900s. My grandfather said about German leadership, it took a little while for us to find out just how serious these new holders of the political power would be in application of their crazy ideas. The application was that, just like everybody else, once they had the responsibility of power, they would act fairly normal. But we were wrong. Mm-hmm. And that was in regard to the Hitler regime. Liberty for both our grandparents was important, and us carrying on that right now and showing how there are new ways, how we need to keep progressing, is so important. So I ask you to start based on what I just said and all that is going on in this country. What do you think of this concept of liberty, and also the concept that maybe we were wrong as a country in how we went about things the last 44 years and the last 400 years, in who we decided to make lead to a better America?
Yeah, I mean, I think all of the things that you say, Aaron, are true. Grandpa spent a lot of his life trying to educate folks about what it meant to be black in this country. He was born in 1868, so a few years after the end of the Civil War, and did his work all the way through 1963 when he died. He died the day before the March on Washington. And so when you look at that breadth of 95 years and the things that he was trying to do, there was a lot there. There was a lot of change. There were a lot of movements in the way we have our society structured and the way it operates and the rest. But clearly, we didn't get to where we meant to get, even though during that time frame, through the Harlem Renaissance, we had a lot of things that went well. A lot of that got reversed before we got to the 1950s and the 1960s. And then we had another push, and a lot of things got done. And then some of that got reversed, or people got a little too comfortable with making change and pushing the change forward. And so here we are. Here we are in 2020 saying some of the same things that we said in the 1920s. When Langston Hughes wrote about a dream deferred in the 1920s, he was talking about exactly what we're going through today. So you're absolutely right. When we talk about justice and we talk about equality and we talk about the promises that this country made to us when it was created, I don't think we've achieved that. I mean, it's clear we haven't achieved that level of promise. Can we? Yes, we can. And we have the inflection point, if you will, right now happening that allows us to begin to articulate better what we really want this country to look like and what we want it to be.
Yeah, what is the fabric? What is what your grandfather fought for to be a founder of the National Association of the Advancement of Colored People, and what my grandfather fought for, which was interfaith, so that all people of all colors and all races can come together to have dialogue. And so they were both fight. You know, the concepts were the same. The problem is what they were doing. From the early 1900s through their deaths is for many reasons more at the forefront now than ever, and the change is more obvious that we need to have it more than ever. What do you think these last number of years and then these last number of weeks, what do you think has been that collision of all this to lead to what is going on now, and how much people seem to be unwilling to shut up anymore?
Well, I mean, I think there were a lot of things going on for many years, going back, literally going back 400 years, many things going on that were dissatisfying to folks. I think when you talk about and you listen to Sojourner Truth, or to Frederick Douglass, or to some of the folks during that slave period, to Harriet Tubman, you listen to the orators of that time, I think you hear in different words the same things that you hear Booker T. Washington then saying to follow them up, and DuBois and Grandpa saying, to follow Booker T up. And then you hear the voices of the Harlem Renaissance, and you hear the voices of Martin Luther King and Malcolm X and Huey Newton and Fannie Lou Hamer. You hear all of these voices, Rosa Parks, the Little Rock Nine. The list is endless, and they were all expressing in an essence the same kind of frustration and the same demand for humanity and the same demand for respect that you're hearing Black Lives Matter and all the organizations that are out protesting today. And so the fact that we are still saying, in essence, the same things that we've always been saying is, I think, the real reason that you see people speaking out now is because they just got to a boiling point, right? A lot of these frustrations and things get tamped down in many different ways, but you really can't keep the popcorn in. You can't. It's gonna come out. Langston talked about it as a dream deferred and talked about it exploding. But it does process through for a long time. If you go back to the 1954 Brown versus Board of Education decision, you'll find an amicus brief called the Social Scientist Statement attached to that, in which Kenneth Clark, Isidore Chine, Stuart Cook, and some other folks talked about, if you don't really start to move into desegregating schools in the right way, you're going to end up with a lot of dissatisfaction that could ultimately result in riots and a lot of upheaval. And so I think there are a lot of collapsing and contrasting and debating viewpoints that are finding their way into the discussion. And when you combine that with our current ability to communicate instantaneously with one another, you really create a crucible in which people feel like they have to step up and step out and voice their perspectives, especially if those perspectives aren't heard and recognized, which I think is a critical part of what we need to do going forward, is making sure that we hear and see those different voices. Because when Booker T. Washington led, you could kind of talk about Black people in a monolithic way. When Grandpa came along, he talked about two-ness and double consciousness, and he started to push those boundaries, and Black people started pushing boundaries around all kinds of different issues, so that you couldn't talk about us in a monolithic way. And they this 100 years that we've grown since then has only complicated that, right? So when I sit back and I think to myself, it's like, you and I are talking, we're coming from different perspectives, but we're bringing our voices to the conversation. What about conservative Black voices? My aunt on my father's side was a Black Republican, one of the people who started the Black Republican Party here in the United States. She was an undersecretary for housing and urban development in the Nixon Ford era, and was a friend of Ronald and Nancy Reagan's. And so, even within my own family, we've had these conflicting, and my aunt and I didn't really conflict that much, but we had different perspectives, right? And those perspectives are still out there. And we need to bring as many of those perspectives to the conversation as we can. Otherwise, all we're going to do is create another group of disenfranchised folks who feel like they're not heard. And in 20 years or 30 years or however many years, they too will bubble over. So now's our chance. Now's our chance to bring as many voices to the table as we can, because we have the tools. We've got all the tools we need to communicate, even in COVID-19 times, with one another, and get these perspectives heard.
And what you just said about how it's not monolithic, there's not just one thing going on here. There are rich African Americans, there are middle class, and there are poor. There's people running companies, and there's people on the streets. So there's Republicans and Democrats. How do all those collective voices get heard? Because to me, we've discussed this a little, the whole concept of divisiveness based on political party, to me, is antiquated. That just makes us fight. And a lot of these issues, most of them, and people in politics are trying to politicize them. They're not political issues. They're human issues.
That's right.
They're simple human issues. And that's why, as you know, we're doing the Logic Party, which you can follow it. The Logic Party on social media. I think it's Logic Party in the number 1, too. But the whole concept of this is not left, not right, but logic. And the logic right now is that we have to come together for the human issue right now. And that's why it's great to see people from both parties, former almost president and Senator Mitt Romney marching in the Black Lives Matter movement yesterday. So it wasn't about politics. It wasn't about a political statement. It was him going because of the human issues at hand. And that from him to whoever you name, someone on the left, they're marching together in solidarity for humanity. And I want to bring up 2 quotes that I think are interesting based on that. One by your grandpa, which said, I believe in the liberty of all men, the space to stretch their arms and their souls, the right to breathe and the right to vote, the freedom to choose their friends, enjoy the sunshine, and ride on the railroads, uncursed by color, thinking, dreaming, working as they will in a kingdom of beauty and love. That's what we're marching for. Mm-hmm. That's why I don't have a voice that much, because yesterday I was marching with thousands of people of every background for that idea, a kingdom of beauty and love. And if you're not for that kingdom, you're not Republican, you're not Democrat, you're being inhuman, in my opinion. Yeah. And my grandpa said, so much of the treasury of values has been taken for granted. What is forgotten too often is the chaotic element of democracy. In the chaotic development of democracy is the clear and guiding principles that were there from the beginning. We see Judaism, within a total context of humanity. So, based on those, again, people from different backgrounds of persecution, how do you think we can continue to unite as many people as possible to thinking these basic concepts, which are concepts that if you're not down with these concepts to me, that's where a wall needs to be built around the people who can't grasp these very simple, beautiful concepts, or we need to educate them.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really important point is, how do you educate folks if they can't see that right now? Because I would not want to cast them aside as much as I would want to find a way to see from their perspective, how do we get you to see within your perspective what it means to be open to these kinds of conversations, open to these kinds of perspectives, and open to the way that we bring that about, to bring that kingdom that Grandpa talked about. So to me, it's about having the conversation. It's about reaching out to folks. It's about listening. It's about speaking your own truth and being strong enough. And that's one of the things, interestingly enough, you were reading from a thing that Grandpa called Credo. And another part of Credo talks about not letting your voice get lost, but standing up for what you believe in and not allowing it to be diluted in ways that don't serve you. And so I think everybody needs to bring those voices to the table. But I think that the thing that has been missing in some of these conversations is mutual respect. I'll go back to the social scientist statement that I mentioned earlier. One of the things that they talk about is the need for mutual respect and liking. And what they were talking about, by the way, in the social scientist statement was how should desegregation in the schools happen? And we are still talking about that, number one. And number two, I think the things that they were talking about apply to this inflection point. We need to have some mutual respect. We need to develop mutual goals. How do you do that? You have conversations. You expose your vulnerabilities. You expose your needs and wants. And you talk about the things that mean the most to you. And as people put those meaningful things on the table, you look for communality. You look for the places where people are essentially saying the same things, maybe different words, but the same essence. And I believe, and this is the reason that I feel energized about our conversation and about the conversations that are going on outside in our culture right now, is I believe there is a central area in these conversations where we believe the same things. We're saying them in different words. We're saying them in different energy levels because of our different levels of frustration or whatever. But we're saying we want some very similar things. John F. Kennedy said it when he talked about, we have the same desires for our children. And we really do. We have very similar goals in very, nuanced ways, perhaps, but we can find that common ground and we can talk and we can continue to expand that common ground into places that are really important. Now, I just said in a handful of words some very, very, very complicated things in a very complicated system that is funded in a particular way right now, that is run by a particular group of people right now, that is really broken in many ways by a lot of people's perspectives right now and needs a lot of work. People, when I say this, and I've been having these conversations for decades now, really start to feel overwhelmed. And I don't blame them because it's big. But what I want people to really hear from me today and from us here today, because I know you believe this too, is that there are ways to break this down into individual responsibility and accountability that we can each take, actions that we can each take. Each of us can be a part of our communities in ways that are meaningful and that bring about the change in a sustainable, measurable, long-term way. And all of that is important. Everybody has a role. And even if you don't feel like you can fulfill all the roles, because I don't think anybody feels that, fulfill what you can do. Add your voice to the conversation. And I think by doing that, we can get to the change that we're seeking.
where is the anger coming from? The deep-rooted anger by too many of the members of our society, and how can we say and show them that anger, whatever your background is, anger is not going to get you anywhere if that's how you root your life in your behaviors. And I mean, that's why this show is called the Together Show and stuff, is because together I believe we need a shift so that you're part of the conversation. You're not being talked to and told, here is what you have to believe. I'm constantly learning. As you've been saying, you're constantly learning.
Mm-hmm.
And no matter what channel you watch for news, if they're talking at you, it can't be that way. It's got to be, and what do you think? And I do ask for everyone watching, write in the comments or write to us what you think and what's going through your mind. And if you are angry, if you are upset, if you feel mad, I want to hear it, because I've felt that way. I am far from where you are, excuse me, in my processing the anger associated to what's been going on. And I guess I think on that topic of anger, an issue that's been going on the last 3-4 years is we've been led by people and by a leader who is, to me, a leader is someone who listens, as you said, to all, not a leader who wants what's best for just himself. And then everyone else is the enemy. That's not going to progress us. That puts us back to like Roman times or something, like some crazy era. I don't even know where it's just these dictators or something. It's like so against progress and empathy and humanity. And when you say listen to both sides, it's hard for me. The KKK, the neo-Nazis, they have a voice. You're right. Everyone has a voice. A voice of hate, though. I want to keep working. And the reason we're going to continue these conversations, and this is only just the beginning, is because as many of those voices of anger and hate that we have, and as many leaders as we have that rule on dividing and hatred, we need our voices to be the leaders right now. We, the people. We, the people. We, meaning us, everyone. We're the voices that matter. Because the voices that are dividing, in my opinion, are not leaders. They're cowards. And I guess in terms of that, because to me that's not politics, that's just logic. What do you think about that logic in listening and then also working to shift as many voices of anger away from anger and divisiveness as possible?
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing that's been the part for me that I've wrestled with and continue to wrestle with is transmuting that anger into something useful, transferring it over into an action that is not repressive and regressive, but is rather productive and constructive. And so I think that's the real key for us, is to get folks to understand that all of these voices do need to be heard, and that we can find a constructive way to use that energy and that anger. Because like I said, I totally get where people are coming from with being angry at this point. But what do we do with that so that it's constructive? That so that emotion and that energy turns into something that is sustainable, because you can't keep that level of anger up for generations. You can't. If you need to transform it into something constructive and useful. And you don't want to continue to create generation after generation of angry people. You want people to feel like they're a part of the society, part of the culture, a part of the country, a part of the republic, a part of the democracy. And so we really need to make sure that we hear those voices in that regard. And those voices need to take accountability and responsibility for coming to the table in ways that allow people to come together and not constantly being thrown apart. Now, having said all of those nice, beautiful words, right? How easy is that? Not easy. How many are we going to get? I don't know. I do know that we need to get to some kind of tipping point where more people believe in what I just said than don't,
Yeah.
and more people are willing to act than to sit back, and more people are willing to be vulnerable, take chances, and reach out to people in ways that are constructive than don't. And so there are a lot of moving pieces here that we all need to take some responsibility and accountability for, and make sure that others who are in the conversation get heard. I'm a big mouth sometimes, and I sometimes, when I'm in a meeting with a bunch of folks, I need to force myself to just kind of lean back and let some people talk. And I do a lot of facilitation, a lot of co-facilitation. I need to make sure I go around the room and the voices get heard. People who are quieter come to the forefront. And I need to say sometimes to people who are big mouths like myself, hey, calm down for a second. Let's hear from some other people who haven't spoken today. And we need to do that as a society from a cultural perspective, going out and saying to people, I haven't heard your voice in this discussion. What do you think? What should we be doing? What do you need from this change?
And this change is about the treatment of African Americans and colored folk in our country for hundreds of years, and how it's only gotten worse in the last number of years.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess what I take from that, from what you just said, and where I think together we can do something, is every time, I guess I can say from what I'm going to do, every time that I feel angry, that I feel mad, that I feel a hatred or toward something going on in the country, or something that's one of our leaders said or someone I know said, I'm going to say, okay, I acknowledge that anger. Now I'm going to put that aside and think, okay, what can I do instead of reacting to that anger so that I can do something that actually helps something I believe in?
Yeah.
Whether that be make a call, ask a question, do post something on social media, go march, try to meet with a leader in our community. All things I've done before, and the anger has to lead my anger. So I'm speaking for myself, but I think could be a thing for everyone. My anger can then get placed into a place of change, and a place where I look back and think I wasn't just mad, I was actually doing something about it. And which goes back to education and where you're educating me right now. Because and we're together, we can all be more educated, no matter how smart you think you are.
That's
You're
right.
not, and as I say, the only people that I know are lying are the people who say they're always right.
That's right. That's right.
Then I know you're lying.
Right.
And there's someone right now in our country who is never wrong. So then I know, all right, you're probably usually wrong. But an education thing that your grandpa said, that a quote from W.E.B. Du Bois is, education is that whole system of human training within and without the school of walls, which molds and develops men. So anytime that we can educate ourselves, take that hate, move it to the side, and then learn something, read something, educate ourselves, so we're actually taking that anger, displacing it, and becoming better people, more learned people, that's a huge thing. Just like he said, to stimulate wildly weak and untrained minds is to play with mighty fires.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, that just shows how much education, another big thing that I think that I work toward and speak about, is so important. The more we educate the weak and the untrained minds, the more we get them to understand more, I think the more the hatred goes away, because an untrained mind, I think a lot of untrained minds have been brought to the forefront lately. And the more they get trained, and I want to know, where does your hatred come from?
Mhm.
Where is that coming from? And how can you look in the mirror and maybe put that in another box so that then you can become a better person? Where can we become better people? And my grandfather said this, which I always found to be poignant when I knew, this is what he said as a rabbi and really one of the original leaders in the interfaith and intercultural movement. He said I felt the main reason for Hitler's success was that people didn't know anything about Jews. There was more ignorance and folks' belief than knowledge. And so what he's referring to and what W.E.B. Du Bois is referring to were the exact same thing.
Exactly.
And so the more we can educate people, so it's like, where is that? And I want to ask to everyone, including the current president, where is your anger coming from? Where is your fear in people not liking you, or only being cool with the people who agree with every word you say? Where is that weakness coming from in your soul? And where could we display? And to all the people who think that that's the way to lead, or that's the good way to conquer this issue, where is that weakness coming from? Where is that fear? Where is that that untrained mind coming from? And where can we educate it? Because
Yeah, I mean, I think you're talking about introspection. I think you're talking about people looking at themselves for their own motivations and for their own sense of self. I was talking to a friend yesterday who's raising a teenager, and who was recounting to me that he felt like his son was struggling a little bit with his own self-esteem. And we got to talking about how do those things develop? How does self-esteem develop? And how do we start to feel more confident in going out into the world? And how do we develop more resilience against some of the bumps and the falls and the scrapes and the barriers that we run into? And I think a huge part of that is encouraging people and helping people to experience success at hearing their voices, success at having their voices heard, success at moving the needle forward in ways that are important to them. And that's hard.
Well, what you just said, though, if you take it, it's like everything is just a step. Everything is a moment in time, is a step. So to everyone who's rooted in anger, who's rooting a thought in anger, who's saying, I don't like black people, who's saying I'm better than someone else, I say what you're saying. Take a moment, go into your heart, and think, what's another way I can look at this so that that hatred becomes a thought of love? What can I see in that person that I'm hating right now?
Right.
What can I see that's beautiful?
Right.
And if it's simply the color of one's skin, what can I see in that person who also came from a mother and father just like myself? What can I see in that person that isn't the color of the skin, but that's similar to me because we're both human? And then every moment that happens, I think that then there's a success. Then there's a brighter future. And then the current leadership not acknowledging the change going on right now, instead of saying it's all about winning and losing and about toughness. No, toughness to me is not about doing that. It's not about dividing and saying how great you are and saying how right you are. Toughness is about saying, I was wrong, which I've been many times. And you said you have been many times. I was wrong. I've been wrong. How can I take that thing I was wrong with, that moment of hate, and put virtue into it? And that's leadership, and that's leading as we the people, as ourselves.
Yeah, when you were reading earlier from Credo, that thing from Grandpa, he mentions in there that armies and navies are nothing more than the tinsel and braggadocio that will ultimately lead to the fall of that empire, that country. So dominance and threatening and violence don't get you anything more than dominance and threatening and violence back. None of these things are going to be solved through hatred. None of them are going to be solved through anger. That doesn't mean that those emotions aren't real, and it doesn't mean that those emotions are somehow wrong or shouldn't be felt. But it's what you do with those emotions when you feel them that really becomes the who we are, how we're known, and what we're known for, and our ability to bring those emotions to the table, but not allow them to derail us from seeking solutions and coming up with sustainable and reasonable approaches to some of the problems that we're faced with. That's the trick. That's the hard part. That's the work. And I mean it, it's work. And I really want people to understand that we have a lot of work in front of us, and it's going to take us a long time, and we're going to have to sustain this effort. And we're going to have a lot of very difficult conversations, and that this web of institutions that we're trying to change and that we're trying to really kind of pull apart and restructure is going to take a lot of time and a lot of energy and a lot of people's devotion. And I mean devotion in the real term of that word means, that heartfelt bringing of yourself to something in a way that can't be pulled away by some other barrier or some other person or some other thing that wants to get in your way, because there's always going to be things in your way. But if you're devoted to finding that answer, then you'll find it. And if you're devoted to linking arms with other people who are looking for the same answers, then you will find it. And I guarantee you that there are people whose external presentation of their desire and their needs doesn't look like yours, but those underlying needs and wants are very, very similar. They want to be heard. They want to be loved. They want to feel success. They want their children to grow up in an environment they feel safe in. They want to love the people that they love, no matter what they look like and who they are. They want the opportunity to be all of who they are. Grandpa also talks about opportunity in Credo, talks about not having the doors of opportunity slammed in your face. A lot of people feel like the doors of opportunity have been slammed in their face. And the more we see other people who appear to not have those doors of opportunity slammed in their face, the more we get frustrated, the more angry we get, and the more we want to lash out. And so that equality, that kind of changing of our society so that people don't feel that way, they don't feel left out, they don't feel disenfranchised, that is the real key to making sure that we don't develop little pockets of anger and resentment in our culture and in our society and in our world that then have to be addressed later. You said it earlier on. If we do these things, that kind of prevention, that kind of work will lead to all kinds of wonderful things later on.
And with that, because I want to go into a few specifics that are happening now, because this conversation, as we've said, is the beginning. Right. Arthur and I are going to be having more conversations, and we want you to be a part of it. We want everyone to be a part of this, to send our thoughts, to send your disagreements. That's what this is all about, is continuing the conversation together, to turn the hopelessness that a lot are feeling into hope. And we'll end with some calls to action that we have in mind. But before that, I'm going to bring up a couple specific things that have been going on. in the news in our with our different leadership, and so we can discuss those. And some might disagree with your opinion, with my opinion, but I think a few need to be addressed right now because they're important. And I want us to also practice the idea of not hating it, but finding some other answer.
Right.
Because, for example, one thing that I find disturbing, and it's based right on what you just said about communities who feel like they don't have a chance. One thing I have never understood is in the president's life. He is one of the rare people who basically life was handed to him. He isn't like the people that he preaches to. So what confuses me and is why people who are searching, as you said, in their community, searching for hope for their kids, searching for more opportunity, didn't grow up with millions of dollars and then just, I believe, $15 million every year just handed to you, no matter what.
Mhm.
I didn't grow up that way. You didn't grow up that way. It's just a foreign concept. Why they then turn to someone who divides and who does not come from their background, has no idea what their life was like, but claims to be tough. And said yesterday, and this is the part that made me angry, was said to he put it up on his Twitter. Everyone kneeling is weak. Standing up, that's tough. One, what do you know about kneeling? And two, kneeling, what I saw kneeling in the streets and what we talked about, that's strength and bravery and acceptance, is kneeling in solidarity. Standing up and just being a rich, tough guy, where's there's no toughness in that. That just, to me, that's weak. So that made me angry hearing that.
Yeah.
And I want to know from you where you think we can direct, one, the people who feel that that is the answer, listening to him, and two, where you can direct my anger, which is, to me, kneeling is being strong.
Well, I think the thing that you're talking about, Aaron, is being able to say that here on my knee, on both knees, laying down, whatever, I am vulnerable. I'm vulnerable to you if you walk up to me and try to strike me. I'm in a position where I'm not being strong and tough and defending myself. But that defensiveness, that inability to be vulnerable, is the problem that we are seeing in some folks in this conversation. You have to be able to open yourself up and show your weaknesses in order for those strengths to then be appreciated and trusted. If all you do is beat people with your strength, then they don't ever feel like they're being heard. They never feel like they're ever your equal. They always feel like they have to defend themselves, and that defensiveness prevents that outreach from ever connecting. And so the vulnerability, Brené Brown talked about guilt and shame and how she, struggled with those concepts until she came to this understanding around vulnerability. And I hear what she's saying, and I take that into my heart, and I believe she's right. It's that vulnerability that allows us to have humility. It allows us to have the ability to admit that we're wrong. It's that ability then to say, hey, you're right, and I want to move towards your perspective because I think the perspective that I have is getting in my way or is getting in our collective way, right? So that is what I see is the need to humble oneself and to be vulnerable, is to then say, I have this the internal strength to change. I have the internal fortitude to say that I'm wrong. I have the internal fortitude to say, I see you and I hear you and I want to understand you better. All of those things don't come from a stick. They don't come from a whip. They don't come from being mauled and run over by a police system. Aaron, I haven't said something, and I'm gonna say it just so the audience can hear it and understand another piece of where I'm coming from, because it's really simple enough to just sit here and talk about being Du Bois's great grandson. But the fact of the matter is, that's my mother's grandfather. And my father's side of the family is a whole different deal, including my father, who was a corrections officer for the city of New York, who was killed in the line of duty. So when people talk about the
I didn't know that.
police, okay, understand when I talk about the police, I'm talking as a policeman's son. I'm talking about someone who walked into a bar and identified his body lying on the floor, shot by someone who came in to rob the place. And he was protecting one of his friends. Okay? That's who I am. I had to go to that funeral. I had to stand up and stand tall and make sure that people understood that we as a family weren't beaten down by his death, right? All of that, all of those pieces of who I am come together in a kind of desire to not close down, to not be defensive, but to rather open myself up and reach out. And if we can help other people to do that in their pain and in their suffering and in all of the things that have been pushed on them and sent to them and put in their way, if we can get folks to, okay, all right, I see you. I see you. What are you saying?
Yeah.
What are you talking about? If we can get them to pull that down a little so that we can get in, we will find the common ground. We will find our communality. We truly will. And all of the things that people are talking about today, I mean, to get to the specific point of defunding the police, things like that, I hear you. I hear you. I really do. I think that there are other consequences to defunding the police that would be unintended consequences and consequences that we might not like. I think we can downsize the police. I think we can demilitarize the police. I think we can educate the police in community outreach and community work that makes them closer to our communities. I've heard some people talking about demanding and requiring that police officers and firemen come from the communities that they serve, so that they live there and they see what's going on and they hear what's going on and they feel what's going on and they're a part of what's going on, whether they're in uniform or not. So there are ways that we can make changes in the system and make changes in ourselves that will bring about the kind of society that we're looking for. But we have to explore those internally, externally, together, separately, and in ways that we haven't been comfortable with in the past. We got to get comfortable with if we're going to get out of this.
And I think what you said about, going through that with a dear family member who died in the line, of duty, is really, it hit me here. I just was like, wow, that's a whole other side of life that you had to go through. And then I was thinking, how many sides of life does everyone have to go through? How much pain does everyone have to go through? And so then I was thinking, with the idea of kneeling, which is such a big statement piece right now, there's the people who think that not kneeling is tough. I guess I say to you, I feel for you. I feel that you haven't gotten to a point of understanding why this is so important. And I hope you get there, because you'll feel a lot more strength when you're willing to be vulnerable. And this includes to the President of the United States. And with the defunding of police, which was a big chant at the rally I was at yesterday, and I'm sure you were too, I think what you just said is much more in line with that things aren't so black and white. There's so much gray in what we're talking about. It's funny to say things aren't so black and white with this issue, but things aren't so black and white. there's so much gray. A friend who is on the force, and he runs a whole force now, and he's was a cop, and he said that a word that I was saying, which is reallocation, instead of defunding, because we need that. You want when you're in trouble, you want someone to call to protect you. But they also need to be better educated. There can be real allocation of funds. We can put back some of the taxes that were taken away from the uber rich, the billionaires, that were the taxes that were taken away. If they get taxed a little more, all of a sudden there's a lot more money to educate people that need it most, including the police. And then I think we're actually honoring what our ancestors stood for.
I mean,
And
when you call the police, you want help, you want protection, and you have an expectation that they are going to be fair and just and equal to you. And as long as we can re-educate folks to those expectations, then the
yeah,
police are not our enemy. They are, they may not become your friend overnight, okay, but they can become the thing that protects you from the bad things that are going on, or even saves you from yourself, or from an accident, or from a health issue. The police serve a lot of functions in our society. One of the things that I would like to see is I would like to see us better define what the police's role is in our
yeah,
society, because part of that role has been given to other people, and they've taken on roles that I don't think are necessarily for them to take on. So we need to look at a lot of those police badges on the side of their cars says to honor and to serve.
yes,
Serve, okay, and I really want us to bring that forward. I want us to also understand that all police aren't any one thing: good, bad, safe, unsafe, violent, or whatever. Police are just as broad in their thinking and in their being as the rest of our society. They reflect the rest of us too. And I want to say one other thing before I hand this back to you. I've been watching a lot of television, like a lot of people have, and you want to know the thing that touched me the most was, and I don't remember what city this is in. I've forgotten. I'm sorry, but people will find it. There
what
was
was it?
a group of protesters coming down a road, and there was a phalanx of police officers there to stop them. And if you're looking at that situation, you're like, oh crap, this is getting ready to go real bad,
Bad.
real fast, right? But the police stopped the protesters, and they asked the protesters to just back up a little bit, and the protesters did. And then the police officers all got down on a knee. They were all kneeling in the face of these protesters. And you could see the protesters, their faces changed, their signs dropped, the tears started. And the police officers kneeled there for a while. And the protesters then kneeled in response. And then the officer stood up. And instead of everybody being afraid of one another, now you see the protesters coming to the police officers and hugging them and thanking them and becoming the conversation that needed to be there in the first place. What was
Huh.
that? What just happened there? That was a group of powerful men and women who were police officers with guns and batons and all of the equipment that police officers have, going down on a knee in a vulnerable position in front of a bunch of people holding sticks and bricks and whatever the heck else they had, and saying to them, I hear you. And the protesters heard them. And now you have a space in which to talk, instead of fighting and throwing things and destroying things. And that's a chance for that anger to dissipate and to become a completely different animal. What did that take? It took a group of police officers who said, we hear you and we want to be a community again. And we understand that you're here for a reason, and we're here for the same reason. That's what it takes. It's vulnerability. That's what it takes.
And that stands for basically everything I think we have been talking about is strength is in willing to take a knee in front of your supposed enemy.
Yeah.
And if you're willing to take a knee in front of your supposed enemy, watch their reaction. Because they might just then be open to taking a knee too and then having a dialogue, a discussion, a demonstration together instead of against. And then a lot of the stuff that's happening right now where we're pitted against each other can evolve. And then even though I think, we're only in the first or second inning of this journey, that's a start. That's starting the game. That's at least starting the action, starting actual action that's not just words that can lead, I hope, the year 2020 with pandemics and protests and violence and riots and everything we've seen. I never thought I'd be out in my neighborhood with a razor blade cleaning off random businesses because of what was destructed. But if that leads to us kneeling instead of putting up our fists with one another in spite of our differences, then the American quote unquote dream is further coming true instead of disintegrating.
I
And that
completely
knee,
agree.
that moment you just talked about is, I believe, what the American dream is all about. And it's then all the stuff that's on the news that we've, there's been the Rand Paul lynching, anti-lynching thing, which was outrageous. I believe you would agree. And the looting and violence, which to a point I get, it's like fed up and you want to do something more, but it doesn't that leads to people being mad at one another.
Well, it's back to the conversation you and I were having before we got onto this onto the program about if you do an eye for an eye, everybody's blind kind of thing, right? And so
Yep.
ultimately, if we can stop that cycle of retribution, that cycle of violence, that cycle of hatred, that cycle of defensiveness, if that cycle of repression, if we can stop that cycle, if we can break it and get into a cycle of conversation, a cycle of conservation, a cycle of paying attention and realizing our humanity and our shared humanity, then we can make this happen. I
Yeah.
really truly believe that, and I know there are going to be people out there who are going to say, well, you're naive, or you're looking at it from this privileged position, and da 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 da, and I certainly can fess up to being in a privileged position in many ways, but I think the thing that we need to be able to do, no matter what position that we're coming from, is to be able to be vulnerable and to humble ourselves in the face of other people's perspectives, needs, opinions, wants, desires, changes, and all the rest, in order to have the conversation. You brought up the Rand Paul thing, and I not only saw that video of what he was saying, but then I also saw the video of Cory Booker responding.
Yeah, that was
And I
powerful.
was really struck by what Cory was saying, in that he really was genuinely confused by his friend. He said it. He said, "This is somebody I've sat next to, and I've worked with, and I've developed bills with, and I don't understand why he's in the way. I don't understand why he's doing this." And Rand Paul, in his speech, was quoting my grandfather, and that was one of my friends brought this whole thing to my attention, because, did you know Rand Paul was quoting your grandfather? And I'm like, Rand Paul quoting grandpa? Really? And so I had to hear it for myself. I had to hear it 2 or 3 times for myself before I'm like, that's Rand Paul quoting DuBois. Oh, okay. And then to hear Cory Booker talking about it, it really brought home how, even though we may have friends and family and coworkers who we believe have good hearts and are in the right place, and they're on the right path and all the rest, people can fall off the path. they can fall, out of sync with us. And then it behooves us to then struggle and wrestle with where did you go off in that direction? Why are you saying that? And Cory Booker tried to say, hey, I just think this is a misinterpretation of the
Yeah.
language in here. And maybe that is what it is. But then Rand Paul then needs to come back and say, well, this is why I was saying that, and this is the direction that I think we need to go, and we need to go back and forward and have that discussion. So I say all of that to say that, you know, Rand Paul quoting my grandpa, I think he didn't take grandpa out of context. I think he was using what grandpa had said about the Sam Hose lynching to portray how heinous lynching is, and it is. And it was transformative for grandpa to see Sam Hose's body parts in that window. It was radicalizing for him. He went away with a new definition of where he was going to go and what he needed to do, and how he needed to humanize Black people and make the larger society, see us differently. So, in that sense, the change for him came from this hatred that was directed at Sam Hose. And so when I hear what Rand Paul was quoting about grandpa, I hope that what people hear is that lynching is heinous, that lynching is something that we don't want in our society. It is something that we need to disavow. It is something that we need to make illegal. It is something we need to punish people for. And we need to do that with a sense of humanity, not a sense of defensiveness or a sense of repression. We need to do that by saying, we're human beings. We need to be respected. Our lives do matter. And we need to make sure that the society values them.
And yeah, it's because, as you said, people can go off the rails and also be quoting your grandfather at the same time. It's a very, which shows how much gray there is, but there's not gray in that lynching is just wrong,
Right.
in my opinion, and your opinion.
Right.
And I guess before we go to just calls to action and end at least this portion of this discussion that's going to continue because every day things change. I guess I wanted to ask you because you said that you know, have been someone of privilege. You've also been someone who's grown up and has been your whole life Black. And my knowledge of that is there isn't a Black man I know or woman I know who hasn't been affected by, in their life, by moments where the color of their skin negatively defined a moment in their life. And so to you, Arthur, I ask just you as the person, if there's a moment that you'd be willing to share, because yes, there's been privilege. There's also been these moments in your life, I am guessing. And if you'd be willing to share one of those moments, because I think it's all about, I had a swastika drawn on my locker in junior high or high school. That was not good. That was negative. That hurt. As a Black man, again, not trying to compare the two, is there a moment that stands out for you?
There were a lot of them, as you might imagine, as I'm sure you've had a number of them in your life. And it's sort of hard to pick one and say, yeah, this was a bad one. But let me pick one and say that there were others that I could have picked in describing. I went to undergraduate school in a little small town in upstate New York called Brockport. And the college there started out as a teacher's college. It was only about 10,000. It's a town of about 10,000, so a small place. And because of my leadership style, I was elected to be the treasurer of our student government in my junior year. And because of that, I was developing relationships with the leaders of the town, talking to them about what the college was doing, talking about what student government was doing in relationship to the townspeople. And so I really started to feel like, hey, I'm getting to know the mayor and the city council people, and I'm really feeling like I'm a part of this little place here. But then I'm walking down the street one day, headed to the record store, and a school bus goes by, and some kid, I don't know, kid or kids, I don't know, I couldn't quite tell, yelled the N word at me from the bus. And of course, the bus just continues down the street, so there's no time for me to react. There's no time for me to educate. There's no time for me to. I just have to absorb it and understand, or try to understand, what just happened to me. What did I just go through, and what did it mean? And luckily for me, I did have outlets. I had places that I could go, people I could talk to, including leaders of the city, to be able to say, this happened to me, and it was very painful, it was very hurtful, and I didn't think I lived in that kind of a place. But it sounds like I may, or I do, at least for some portion of the people who live here. And so it was hard. It was hard to kind of take on. But herein lies something that I was talking about earlier. If we can give people a sense of success, and we can really bring them into our society and help them develop some internal resilience, and give them tools and resources to go to and use when these kinds of things happen, then they don't have to be slapped down and stay down. They can get up and they can move forward. And I truly believe it's that getting up, that resilience, that bouncing up off of your face or off of your knees, and moving forward in a constructive way, that is the key to resisting and responding and surviving anti-Semitism or racism or sexism or homophobia or any of these things that we are fighting against. And you have to have that inside you if you're going to be able to transform it into constructive action for yourself and for your community.
And, I want to say that I am so sorry that that happened to you. I cannot imagine what that must feel like, but I know it must have hurt, as you said, so much. I also can't imagine what George Floyd went through and everything in between.
Yeah.
And I think that's where we need these calls to action for everyone listening, and to share Arthur's message and what we've been talking about. Keep sharing it, spread these words, because that's doing something, so that everything from that moment in college for you to what has happened to George Floyd now stops.
Mm-hmm.
It
And what
stops.
happened to you too, Aaron? I mean,
And
I have a ton of Jewish friends, because I went to a predominantly Jewish high school in New York. And I can look back on when I was a freshman and didn't have any idea what Jewish culture or Jewish religion was about. And I gave my buddy Stephen Greenspan in my homeschool class a Christmas card. And Stephen, to his credit, if you're out there listening, Steve, God bless you. You helped me in ways that you never imagined, because he laughed and he took my card. He didn't reject it. He came back the next day with a Hanukkah card for me and educated me what the difference was and what he was about, and how those religious ceremonies were respected, but different and separate in their own ways. And it really is that kind of sense that gave me a way to then look at the Holocaust differently, to watch the movies about those times, and to see differently what we were really fighting against and fighting for in World War II. And so it's truly, truly, truly been an education for me in having Jewish friends be so very patient with me, and explaining and describing and teaching me the words and what they mean and why they're important, and the holidays and all the rest. But that part of my life then allows me to look at you and say, my God, what were people thinking to draw a swastika on your locker? What drove people to that, and how hurtful that must have been for you to see that and respond to that, and to have people, your friends around you, going, to you, hopefully, and taking you in their arms and saying, I'm sorry for this, and having the administration of your school address the issues. Hopefully those things happened to then reintegrate your sense of the school that you were in into something positive.
Well, so what you said about you and your friend and the cards being exchanged, to me, that was an instance of both of you taking a knee and saying, look, we hear you, we hear each other's mistakes, how trivial they might be,
Yeah.
and we want to learn more from one another.
Mm-hmm.
My specific incident, the principal's reaction, and I quote, was, "But it's just a small swastika," and
Okay.
that's what her response was.
Jeez.
So that was the opposite of the leadership we're talking about.
Exactly.
And that's what we want to stop. We want these blatant acts of uneducated naivety.
Call it what it is, Aaron. It's hatred.
Hatred.
It is a lack of understanding. It is a clear way of saying to you, you are other. You don't belong here. You are rejected. Who you are is rejected, and that is nonsense. That is exactly what we're fighting against. And to have someone in a position of power make it about the size. No, it's about what does that mean? What does that symbol mean to your people? What does that symbol mean to you as an individual and how you fit in to the school that you're in? And clearly, just a total ignorance about any of those kinds of parameters and building a constructive place, right?
Yep.
You gotta give people the tools to build that constructive space and build that crucible that from which we can grow into a better society, a better democracy. I mean, you go back and you read historical folks talking about democracy and the republic, and you understand that this is an experiment, and you understand that we're practicing and we're stumbling and we're moving forward. I want people to understand we are moving forward. We're not stuck, that we are trying to make a change in this inflection point that takes our democracy and our republic to a new place. I just want people to believe in that, and I want them to take what happened to you and what happened to me and say, never again. We don't want that.
No, and that's why, I mean, this is the Black Lives Matter movement, and it stands for so much, and we are in this together, you and me talking right now, and with everyone who is watching and listening together. We are in this together to progress and to continue the American experiment on a progressive journey towards success. And for everyone who wonders, I think, what they can do now until we re-engage in the conversation on this show and in general, going forward, you can write to both of us. I'm the Aaron Wolf on social media, and ask me a question, say something you disagree in what we've talked about. You can also follow the Logic Party, which is the Logic Party, because it's, or the Logic Party, the number one, because that stands for what we're talking about here, about not dividing, about coming together, and about eliminating hatred. And then also, and I think, Arthur, it's something that you've already said, a big thing you can do is on the national level and the local level, support the people that you believe in that want to make your city, your town, a more hopeful and better place for you and for your family and for society. And vote. Voting is a way that everyone has been given that gift, as your grandfather was quoted as saying. People fought for that right. Use it.
Yeah.
And then also to teach, right? And you've said this, to continue to teach. When you learn something, tell someone else.
Yeah.
We all are teachers. We all are learners, we're all listeners, and we're all teachers. And we can continue to teach and learn at the same time. And I think making sure that if you see a person, as you said, a quiet person in your community, make sure they know their voice matters too. And I think finally, and you can talk about this, also donate money to the person or the cause that might matter to you that you feel can invoke change. And do you want to just talk about that before we end about these calls to action and donating to, if you have the $5, whatever it might be to do that right now, which I know it's a tough time right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think that donation doesn't have to be money. The donation can be bringing your voice or bringing your talent or your gift forward. If somebody said to me, draw a picture of a family, I would be doing stick figures, okay?
Yeah.
But I have friends who are very talented and tell a story. You tell a story in this medium, and we all have these skills and these gifts. If you can't donate money, donate your time, donate your voice. Really go out and look for places in your community where you can have an impact, where you can make a change in the right direction, in the direction that you believe is a direction of your values and your beliefs. I really think that we all have that. We all have that space, and it's just a matter of going out and doing it.
And so with that, I think let's keep this conversation going. Let's keep everyone doing your part, waking up every day during this pandemic, during all the craziness going on. And if you do one thing positive, like we're talking about, I believe it's a successful day for everyone. And if you want to keep following what's going on, we're the Together Show live on all the socials, and this will also be on the Hopeless Show, Aaron and Rohit's Hopeless Show podcast, which is on all podcast apps. And then again, we're going to be continuing to talk about it more, and then the Logic Party, I think, says it all, because
right.
And what do you think? I mean, I guess as a to roll off, what do you think of this concept of a Logic Party?
I love the concept of a Logic Party, because it takes it out of that conservative liberal conversation, or the the Jewish Christian conversation, or it takes us into a place that's more neutral. The thing that I would like to leave people with is, often enough you hear the quote from Gandhi that's attributed to Gandhi: "Be the change that you wish to see in the world." But that's not what Gandhi said. Gandhi said we must be the change that we wish to see in the world. Those two words change the entire inflection of what he's saying, and really empower people to go out and be that change. We must do that. We really do. It's easy for you and I, because we had people in front of us to kind of plow the road a little bit, and to then empower us and give us that imprimatur to say, do this. I was 3 months old. You were probably a couple of years old when your grandpa, sitting on your grandpa's knee, when you got that feeling, this is who I want to be. This is who my grandpa expects me to be, right? And those are the things that we need to pass on to so many of our kids and so many of our young people, so that they feel like their voices are heard and that they can make these changes happen.
And amen to that, because that is what it's all about. And it's by doing. Lead by example, lead by doing. And then if we lead by doing and continue to do right now, continue to do right now, anything possible. And we've talked about a lot of possible things you can do. Any of those, then you're being an amazing American and an amazing contributor to our society, so we can grow to a brighter future and rise above all the noise and all the nonsense that we're being spat at right now, to places of change and hope.
And join the conversation. Join our conversation. If you're hearing us right now, invite some friends to come to the next version, and invite some people to get into the conversation, because that's what's going to get the change done.
And share this one so we can keep these messages rolling, as I wait to get my voice back. So thank you, Arthur, for doing this and being a part of this. This discussion was enlightening to me as a white guy who doesn't know your plight, and I thank you. And I say I can't wait till we get to do this again and continue to come together um, and see that change and people continue to understand that strength is in being willing to admit that you don't know everything.
Thank you, Aaron, for presenting, this platform for us to have this conversation, and for being the vulnerable person that you are, that brings all of those skills and that depth to the conversation, and the willingness to tell the story. Because without your desire to tell this story, none of it happens. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Now we're thanking each other. So I thank you and you thank me. We'll just keep going back and forth. So with that, we end, and we can't wait for everyone's comments and to continue the conversation. So thank
Absolutely.
you. Godspeed from the bottom of my heart.
Thank you, my brother.
Thank you.